They handcuffed her like she was a threat to national security. A black woman in shackles, surrounded by murmurs and suspicion. Yet the courtroom fell dead silent when a 4-star general walked in. "Are the handcuffs really necessary, officer?" The question hung in the air, calm and deliberate, cutting through the tension like a blade. Alexis Washington didn't raise her voice, nor did she plead. Her tone was even, measured, enough to make the deputy hesitate, if only for a second. The steel cuffs clinked around her small, delicate wrists, out of place on someone so composed. Her serenity was almost unsettling, especially for a woman accused of illegal weapons possession and resisting arrest. It was a crisp October Tuesday in Jefferson County, and the courthouse was packed. Word had spread fast about the young black woman hauled and wearing the orange jumpsuit of the local jail. The contrast between her prison garb and dignified posture impossible to ignore. At just 28, Alexis sat motionless in the defendant's dock, a picture of self-control. No one, least of all she, had imagined a weekend of solo target practice would spiral into this, a courtroom circus, national headlines looming, and whispers branding her a domestic terrorist. The defendant was found in possession of military-grade precision equipment without proper documentation, announced Prosecutor Daniel Hayes, his voice sharp with theatrical precision. He was a middle-aged white man who stretched every syllable with performative authority. A customized sniper rifle, special ammunition, camouflage gear. He paused for effect and added, when questioned, Ms. Washington refused to cooperate and behaved suspiciously. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the audience. From the second row, a woman scoffed loud enough to be heard. Another one tried to cause trouble. Alexis didn't flinch. Her expression remained neutral, even as her public defender, Dr. Martinez, a man who'd known her for barely 2 hours, fumbled through a mess of paperwork, visibly sweating. "Your Honor," Martinez began, voice uncertain, "my client is exercising her constitutional right to remain silent." Hayes seized a moment, lips curling with sarcasm. Right to remain silent? Or is she simply refusing to explain why an unemployed young woman possesses military equipment valued at over $50,000? All eyes returned to Alexis. She didn't react, but those watching closely would have seen something flicker in her eyes. Not fear, not rage. Something colder, more calculating. The kind of calm forged in fire, familiar only to those trained to keep breathing when the world goes black. She wasn't intimidated. She was waiting. Judge Richardson, himself a Vietnam veteran, scanned the documents before him, his brow furrowed. "Miss Washington, do you understand the seriousness of these charges? Illegal possession of military weapons can carry up to 15 years in federal prison." "I understand perfectly, Your Honor." Her voice, crisp and articulate, echoed in the chamber. More than one person looked up, surprised. She didn't speak like someone from the streets. There was no slang, no hardened edge, just clarity. From the front row, journalist Sarah Chun's pen flew across her notepad. A young black woman with illegal weapons? This wasn't just a trial. It was a headline. She could already imagine the clicks. Sniper in orange. America's newest threat? The story wrote itself. Hayes pressed forward. "Your Honor, the defendant was found on an abandoned property, firing a weapon most local police departments don't even have access to. When approached, she demonstrated suspicious technical knowledge of military-grade equipment. We are requesting preventive detention until the full scope of this case can be uncovered." Still shackled, Alexis closed her eyes. Inhale for 4 seconds. Hold for 4. Exhale for 4. It was a breathing technique few civilians knew. This wasn't yoga. It was survival training, learned in scenarios where panic could mean death. When she opened her eyes, they were steady, focused. There was no trace of fear, just patience, precision. To anyone paying attention, Alexis didn't look like a woman cracking under pressure. She looked like someone with a plan, someone trained to wait for the exact right moment to act. And if anyone thought her silence meant submission, they were gravely mistaken. If the story of prejudice, misunderstanding, and buried truths stirs something in you, don't forget to subscribe, because what happened next inside that courtroom would leave everyone stunned, and it would prove In no uncertain terms, why people like Alexis Washington should never be judged by their skin, their silence, or their appearance. The bail hearing spiraled into a spectacle. Daniel Hayes knew exactly how to play the audience. In just 3 days since Alexis's arrest, he'd appeared on 4 local news stations, hammering the same talking points. Young, black, female, heavily armed, suspicious background. His narrative was calculated, loaded with fear. "Your Honor," Hayes said, pulling out a thick folder of photographs, "I'd like the present physical evidence of the danger this defendant poses to our community." He laid them out dramatically. The custom sniper rifle, the night vision scope, the ballistic plates, the tactical vest. "This isn't gear," he said. "This is war equipment." What he didn't say, what he very carefully avoided saying, was that every item in those photos was legally registered, all accounted for, all within regulation, just not under the name Alexis Washington. And no one, not yet, had figured out why. "This is not sporting equipment," Hayes declared, holding up a glossy, enlarged photograph like he was presenting Exhibit A in a national security briefing. "This is a weaponry used by military snipers in combat operations. The question we all must ask is, what does an unemployed young woman intend to do with this?" A ripple of tension spread through the courtroom like the tightening of a noose. Eyes narrowed, lips pressed tight. Sarah Chun didn't even blink as she hammered at her tablet, already composing a headline she knew would set the internet on fire. "Young black woman armed to the teeth terrorizes quiet town." The narrative was seductive, explosive, and profitable. Truth was optional. In the defense corner, Dr. Martinez glanced at his client, hoping desperately that she would offer something. A word, a glance, a crack in the facade. But Alexis Washington remained still, posture perfect, hands folded in her lap, as if she were meditating instead of facing the full weight of federal prosecution. In 15 years of public defense, Martinez had never encountered someone so composed, or so silent. "She hasn't denied the charges," he muttered, almost to himself. "Hasn't offered an explanation. Hasn't shown a flicker of emotion." Aloud, he repeated the one line he had to cling to: "My client is exercising her constitutional right to remain silent." Hayes scoffed, his smirk cruel and performative. "Right to remain silent," he echoed. Or perhaps the defendant is simply unable to explain her actions without incriminating herself further. Judge Richardson's brows drew together as he flipped through the file once more. The photographs were striking. The high-end scope, the hand-customized stock, the cold precision of the tools. But it was the absence of any background on the woman sitting before him. No employment, no fixed address, no cooperative answers. That cast a heavy shadow over everything. The silence wasn't just inconvenient. It was unnerving. "Ms. Washington," the judge said slowly, "are you absolutely sure you don't want to make any statement regarding the origin of these items?" Alexis looked up at him, her gaze steady calm. Something passed between them, not defiance, not arrogance, but something deeper. The quiet self-assurance of a woman who had stood before far more terrifying tribunals than this one. Courts without due process. Situations where decisions were made not in years, but in lives. "Not at this time, Your Honor," she said, her voice soft, unshaken, and polite. So polite, in fact, that it grated against the image Hayes was trying so hard to conjure. The prosecutor pounced. "Your Honor, it is clear the defendant has undergone advanced military training," Hayes said, his voice rising theatrically. "Her handling of the equipment, when approached, was not that of an amateur. We questioned her about possible military service, but she refuses to provide enlistment records. In fact, she refuses to provide any documentation." In the second row, Robert Mills shifted in his seat, a retired Army Ranger with 2 tours under his belt. Mills had been quiet until now, but something about the woman on trial was pulling at buried instincts. The square set of her shoulders, the way her fingers tapped the rhythm of a breathing pattern only combat personnel knew. It was like watching a ghost from a life he had tried to leave behind. Hayes turned back to the judge, now fully in control of the room. "We have confirmed that the defendant has no formal employment history in the past 5 years. No reported income, no registered residence. Yet she has access to over $80,000 in tactical equipment. Where did that money come from?" The insinuation landed like a grenade. Drug trafficking, extremist ties, paramilitary affiliations. Hayes didn't need to say it outright. He let the suspicion fester in the minds of those who already wanted to believe it. A young black woman with money, weapons, and silence? In this community, that combination was practically an open verdict. Alexis closed her eyes again. Inhale through the nose for seconds. Hold for seconds. Exhale slowly through the mouth. It was muscle memory now, ingrained during training at Fort Bragg. The method wasn't just about stress relief. It was survival. Stay calm. Stay focused. Don't give the enemy what they want. Does the defense have anything to add? Judge Richardson asked, his voice neutral, but his expression clearly leaning toward the prosecution. Dr. Martinez rose awkwardly, his chair scraping the floor like a surrender flag. Your Honor, my client has no criminal record, not even a parking ticket. There is not a single act of violence in her history. To our knowledge, Hayes interjected, lips tight with confidence. But a person who operates in the shadows, who conceals her past and refuses to explain a cache of combat-grade weapons, clearly a secret she cannot reveal in a court of law. A murmur swept the gallery. The seeds had taken root. Hayes knew his performance was landing. He wasn't just prosecuting a case. He was writing a story. One that would play well in a town that still locked car doors at stoplights when the wrong people walked by. Sarah Chun hit send on her first article. Armed mystery. Young woman refuses to explain military arsenal. Intense trial unfolds in Jefferson County. The image she chose, Alexis in cuffs, had bowed, eyes unreadable, had already begun to spread across social media, gathering momentum with every passing second. But Robert Mills remained frozen. There was something he couldn't shake. That bearing, that discipline. He'd seen it once before years ago, during a joint mission. The look in the eyes of a fellow operator who had survived a Black Ops rescue mission in hostile territory. Most people in the room saw a threat. Mills saw a veteran. Your Honor, Hayes said, rising for crescendo, I request that bail be denied. This defendant poses a clear and present danger to our community. Her suspicious behavior, her refusal to cooperate, and the military-grade nature of her arsenal suggests involvement in activities that go far beyond illegal possession of firearms. The silence that followed was electric. No one moved. No one breathed. Then came the soft sound of Alexis adjusting her posture. Even handcuffed, even in a prison jumpsuit, she sat with a dignity that unsettled some, like they were witnessing something deeply wrong, though they couldn't articulate why. What they didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that every word spoken in that room, every glance, every insinuation, was being cataloged by a mind trained to retain mission-critical intelligence. Not for revenge, for justice. One that was coming sooner than they thought. When the truth finally surfaced, when the full weight of who Alexis Washington truly was came to light, the humiliation she endured in that room would be returned with interest. Interest no one in that courtroom was prepared to pay. Judge Richardson banged the gavel with unnecessary force, sealing the moment like a coffin lid. Bail is denied. The defendant will remain in custody until trial. The sound echoed like a gunshot. Hayes smiled as if he'd just won re-election. Outside the courthouse, he held court for the cameras. Justice was served today, he declared. We will not allow dangerous elements to threaten our peaceful community. Sarah Chun was already working on her next headline. Court denies bail for armed suspect as mystery deepens. Who is Alexis Washington really? Inside, the room slowly emptied. But Robert Mills didn't move. He remained seated, watching Alexis being led away. A storm of flashbulbs met her outside. She didn't blink, didn't duck, just walked with that same unflinching grace that haunted him. He knew, whatever battle she'd fought before this courtroom, it hadn't been her first, and it wouldn't be her last. Even in handcuffs, her body language betrayed nothing but precision, the way Alexis maintained situational awareness, eyes scanning the room at measured intervals. Her breathing, even in control, was textbook. But not from any civilian textbook. This was military, specialized, disciplined in a way that only came from high-level operational training. In the hallway outside the courtroom, Robert Mills moved with quiet urgency. He approached Dr. Martinez, who looked drained from 2 days of public attacks and stonewalling. "Excuse me," Mills said, his tone respectful but firm. "I'm Robert Mills, a war veteran. I need to talk to you about your client." Martinez glanced at him, his suspicion immediate. "I can't discuss details of the case." "I'm not asking for details," Mills replied, lowering his voice. "I'm offering information." Martinez hesitated as Mills leaned in. "Your client has advanced military training. Very advanced. And if I'm right about what I suspect, you're dealing with someone who operates at a level this court has never seen." The lawyer blinked. In 15 years of defending clients, Martinez had developed a radar for people who spoke with authority they hadn't earned. Mills wasn't one of them. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting," Mills said slowly, "that we figure out why someone with that kind of training is choosing silence, when a single phone call could make all of this disappear." Meanwhile, back at the Jefferson County Jail, Alexis continued to follow a regimen that felt less like prison survival and more like operational readiness. She woke at 5 a.m. sharp, performed bodyweight exercises in silence, meditated for precisely 15 minutes, and spent the remainder of her day observing. Not watching, observing. Tracking guard rotations, inmate behavior patterns, security vulnerabilities. She memorized the layout of the facility without ever leaving her unit. Detective Warren, one of the arresting officers, couldn't shake a growing unease. During his rounds, he turned to his partner. "Man, it's weird. Most inmates break down or lash out. She's different. It's like she's waiting." On the second night, Alexis received an unanticipated visit. Dr. Martinez entered the cold visiting room flanked by Robert Mills, who had insisted on attending. "Miss Washington," Martinez began, choosing his words carefully. "This is Robert Mills. He's a veteran. He believes he may be able to help with your case." Alexis studied Mills, her eyes locking with his. Something imperceptible shifted. It wasn't recognition. It was recognition of a kind, as if two operatives had found each other in plain sight, speaking a language no one else in the room could hear. "How long did you serve?" Mills asked, voice low, steady, laced with something Martinez couldn't identify. "Is that relevant?" Alexis responded coolly, but her posture changed slightly. Shoulders squared, breathing stilled. 11th Airborne. 2 tours in Afghanistan. Mills said, "I've worked with operators. I know the signs." A heavy silence fell. Martinez suddenly felt like an outsider in the conversation, a civilian among coded professionals. Finally, Alexis spoke. "Mr. Mills, there are situations where disclosing certain information causes more harm than good. And there are situations," Mills countered, "where silence compromises larger operations." Martinez leaned in, visibly frustrated. "Okay, can someone please explain what the hell you're talking about?" Alexis didn't look at him. She stared straight at Mills. "If you serve where you say you did, then you know some missions require cover, even when it hurts." Mills nodded slowly. "And I also know there are protocols for compromised agents. Protocols that activate when the mission can't be protected any longer." Alexis's voice dropped to a murmur. "And what if those channels are being tested?" That gave Mills pause. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across his face. He didn't know whether she was being monitored or whether she was monitoring them. The next morning, Hayes called a press conference outside the courthouse, his suit immaculate and expression somber. "After further investigation," he intoned, "we have discovered the defendant has suspicious connections that extend far beyond what we initially believed. We are now coordinating with federal agencies to determine if a larger domestic network is operating in our region." It was classic fear-mongering, laced with political ambition. The crowd soaked it up. Sarah Chun, always first to strike, pushed publish on her next article. "Exclusive investigation. Possible terrorist connections of armed suspect." The story ignited across social platforms, triggering waves of paranoia, racism, and fevered speculation. Hashtag spread. Armchair analysts filled comment sections with conspiracies. But Mills couldn't shake what Alexis had said. That evening, after years of silence. He made a call he thought he'd never make again. "Jake," he said quietly into phone. "It's me, Robert Mills. I need to check something." "No, not over the phone. Do you still have access to the secure channels?" On the other side of the country, wheels began to turn. While Mills reached into old networks, Alexis remained a model inmate, silent, precise, unshaken. The guards couldn't figure her out. She didn't talk, didn't argue, didn't plead. She watched. During recreation, she sat alone, tracking every movement inside the prison yard. The timing of the cell door locks, the posture of guards near the exits, the blind spots in the cameras. Planning an escape? Lisa, the woman in the neighboring cell, asked dryly, arms crossed. Alexis offered a small smile, one that didn't quite reach her eyes. "No," she said. "I'm waiting." Lisa blinked. "Waiting for what?" Alexis looked out over the yard. For the right moment. On the third night, Dr. Martinez returned, this time alone. His face was drawn, voice tense. "Alexis," he said, dropping the formalities, "Mills told me some things that have changed how I see this case. He believes you're not who Hayes claims you are." Alexis remained still. "And who does Mr. Mills think I am?" "He thinks," Martinez replied, carefully choosing every word, "that you serve this country in ways most people will never understand. And that maybe, just maybe, this case is bigger than any of us imagined." She didn't answer, but behind those calm eyes, something turned. The game had begun. "Dr. Martinez," Alexis said, leaning forward just slightly. The shift was minimal, but the weight of it was seismic. Sometimes the most dangerous people in the room are the ones who underestimate who they're dealing with. And sometimes the best strategy is to let them keep underestimating you until it's too late to correct the mistake. The words hit him like a low thunderclap. A chill raced down Martinez's spine as he stared at her face, calm but burning with something primal. "What are you talking about?" he asked. "I'm talking about patience," Alexis replied. Her voice was calm, but her eyes gleamed with a focus he had never seen. "About knowing when to wait, when to let the lies stack up, the egos inflate, the masks drop, and then knowing exactly when to strike." That same night, Robert Mills sat alone in his apartment, staring out into the darkness. Then the call came. "Robert, you need to stop," the voice on the line said urgently. "Stop asking questions about that woman. There are things moving behind the curtain that you can't even begin to understand." Mills gripped the phone tighter. "Jake, just answer one thing. Is she who I think she is?" A long silence followed, one that spoke louder than any answer. "If you value your safety and hers," Jake finally said, "walk away. Trust me, Robert, this is bigger than both of us. There are forces at work that don't take kindly to civilians poking around, especially when one of their own is on assignment." But not everyone was listening, especially not Officer Daniel Hayes, who, as he sipped a bourbon in his suburban mansion, dreamed of his next press appearance. He had no idea that every slur, every smirk, every ounce of humiliation he'd piled onto Alexis Washington had been silently archived by a mind trained to catalog details under battlefield conditions. He had no concept of the abyss he was dancing around, because what Hayes failed to understand is that there's a critical distinction between prey and a predator pretending to be prey. And when someone trained to neutralize national threats decides that you are the threat, the only thing left to wonder is whether you'll have enough time to regret it before it's too late to beg. On the fourth morning, with the courthouse buzzing louder than ever, Hayes staged his most ambitious press conference yet. "I can now confirm," he said to the sea of flashing lights and microphones, "that our investigation has revealed troubling connections. We believe the defendant may be linked to terrorist financing networks, possibly operating through untraceable military equipment." Sarah Chun didn't even look up from her tablet as she typed. Her headline was already live. Breaking. Armed suspect may be part of domestic terror cell. The clicks were coming in by the second. "This is no longer just a legal issue," Hayes continued, his voice swelling with self-importance. "This is a matter of national security. We cannot allow radical." The thunderous chop of military helicopters cut through his sentence like a blade. Two Blackhawks descended onto the courthouse lawn. A motorcade of sleek, black vehicles rolled in behind them, each bearing Pentagon plates. Hayes froze mid-sentence, blinking against a sudden blast of wind. Journalists gasped. Spectators stood. Uniformed soldiers, dressed in full ceremonial regalia, marched with deadly precision toward the building. As I was saying, Hayes stammered, but his voice was suddenly thinner, unsteady. Inside, Dr. Martinez's phone buzzed violently. He answered, and the voice on the other end snapped him to attention. "Doctor, this is Colonel James from the Army General Counsel's office. I need you to listen carefully. Keep your client exactly where she is. Do not sign anything. Do not approve any transfers. A general is on her way. Do you understand?" In the courtroom, Hayes was basking in his final, misguided spotlight when the main double doors swung open with the force of a sledgehammer. General Patricia Morrison entered with 4 silver stars glinting on her chest, her face carved from stone. Behind her marched high-ranking officers, their medals catching the fluorescent light. The room went silent, as if oxygen had been vacuumed from the air. Whereas Commander Washington, the general's voice rang like a war drum across the marble halls. Hayes paled. "Co-commander? I don't understand. We suspect possible terrorists." "You," General Morrison cut him off, each syllable razor-sharp, "have just made the gravest error of your career." She stepped forward, authority radiating from every inch of her. "You are speaking of Commander Alexis Washington, one of the most decorated field operators in the history of modern American warfare." Gasps erupted across the room. The judge blinked rapidly as a senior officer stepped forward and handed him a classified dossier. Judge Richardson's eyes widened with every page. "My God," he whispered. "Commander Washington," Morrison continued, "is a recipient of a Purple Heart Bronze Star and Silver Star. She has completed 7 Black Ops missions in hostile territory, including counterterrorism operations that saved American lives. Lives you'll never know about." Hayes tried to speak, but his voice cracked. She refused to identify herself. She refused, Morrison snapped, because she was operating under a deep-cover directive authorized by the Pentagon and the Department of Defense. Operation Hollow Veil, a covert investigation into intelligence leaks in local law enforcement and judicial networks. The weight of the words crushed the room. "And congratulations, Officer Hayes," the general added coldly. "You pass her tests with flying colors." Sarah Chun dropped her tablet. Her exclusive expose on a supposed terrorist had just become the most humiliating misfire of her career. General Morrison didn't pause. Every insinuation, every assumption, every attempt to turn a war hero into a criminal has been documented. By the press, by the court, by us. Commander Washington was sent here to observe how local authorities would react to a black operative in possession of legal military gear. And the results, she said with scathing precision, have been illuminating. Judge Richardson stood, straightened his robe, and bowed his head respectfully. "General, please accept my sincerest apologies." "Your Honor, your apology is accepted. You followed protocol. Others here," she said, turning her eyes on Hayes, "turn their prejudice into a political performance." Hayes trembled. "I didn't know. I was just—" "You were just following your basest instincts." Her voice dropped to a near growl. "You saw a black woman and assumed criminality. You saw military-grade equipment and created a terrorist fantasy. You turned valor into villainy for headlines." At that moment, Alexis was escorted into the courtroom. Not in handcuffs, not in prison orange, but in full military uniform. Her boots echoed sharply on the floor, her medals gleaming beneath the fluorescent lights. The transformation was seismic. Shoulders back, chin high, the quiet storm in her eyes finally unleashed. "Commander Washington." General Morrison addressed her, formally and without hesitation. Alexis gave a crisp salute. "Reporting as ordered, ma'am." The room, once so eager to judge, now stood in stunned silence, watching the predator finally step into the light. "I deeply regret the treatment you received," General Morrison said, her voice steady but solemn. "Your sacrifice on behalf of this operation has not gone unnoticed." "Thank you, General. Alexis replied with calm finality. Mission accomplished. Hayes stood frozen, his face a portrait of dread, as the same news cameras he had summoned for personal glory now recorded the unraveling of his career. Every smug press conference, every poisonous insinuation, every calculated attempt to destroy her, it was all being documented in crystal clear high definition, not as proof of his heroism, but as irrefutable evidence of his disgrace. Robert Mills approached the newly revealed colonel, his eyes misted with emotion. "I knew there was something special about you," he said quietly. "Thank you for your service." Alexis nodded once. "Thank you for yours, veteran." Then General Morrison turned to face the sea of reporters, her jaw set like granite. "Let me be clear," she announced. "Commander Washington is an American hero. Anyone who exploited her arrest for political gain or journalistic sensationalism will be held accountable by the appropriate agencies." Sarah Chun felt the words like a hammer on glass. Her fingers hovered over her tablet, motionless. Her scoop, the story she had chased with such hunger, had become a journalistic tragedy. Her face paled as she imagined her name trending online for all the wrong reasons. Again, Hayes, meanwhile, knew with bone-deep certainty that his political career had just died before a live studio audience. And worse, it had died not in silence, but with thunderous applause for the woman he tried to bury under his prejudice. What he couldn't grasp yet was the irony that would haunt him forever. His lust for attention had illuminated everything he most wanted to keep hidden. And in trying to destroy a protector of the very country he claimed to serve, he had made himself the villain in a story that would be taught as a cautionary tale for years to come. 6 months later, Daniel Hayes wore a paper hat and an apron that smelled of frying oil. He was scrubbing tables at a fast food restaurant off the interstate. His new reality after every law firm in the state refused to touch his toxic name. Videos of his downfall had gone viral. They played on loop in internet compilations titled "When Ego Backfires" and "Public Humiliation." Top 10 moments. "Table 3 needs to be cleared," barked his 22-year-old manager, barely glancing at him. Hayes winced, not at the command, but at the tone. No one cared who he had been. Sarah Chun didn't fare much better. Once a rising star in journalism, she now freelanced for small local blogs, writing articles on winter gardening tips and pet hygiene. No mainstream outlet would hire her. Her credibility had died the moment she sold out truth for clicks. But elsewhere, real transformation was taking root. Commander Alexis Washington had been promoted to colonel. Her next assignment was as lead architect of a revolutionary military training program designed to identify and eliminate systemic bias within the armed forces. The first lecture of the program was being nationally televised, broadcast to over 500 senior officers across every branch of the military. "Prejudice isn't just morally wrong," Colonel Washington told the solemn audience, standing tall in her full dress uniform. "It's tactically stupid. When you underestimate someone based on skin color, gender, or where they grew up, you compromise not just morality, but mission readiness." From the front row, Robert Mills watched with pride. He had been the first to see what others missed. Not just a soldier, but a symbol. Dr. Martinez sat beside him, now a military lawyer with clearance he never dreamed of having. He scribbled notes furiously as the colonel continued, every word destined for the new defense protocols being developed under her leadership. "You saw what happened," she said, her gaze sweeping the auditorium. "You saw Officer Hayes try to twist my heroism into terrorism because he couldn't accept that a black woman could be more qualified than he was. That wasn't just a moral failure. That was a strategic failure that risked a national security operation." Generals nodded gravely. The Washington case was already part of curriculum at 3 military academies, taught as a modern example of how racial bias can sabotage intelligence operations, missions, and lives. Back in his tiny shared apartment, Hayes watched the live broadcast with glassy eyes. He didn't wait for the applause. He turned the television off and stared blankly at the wall. His ex-wife had divorced him 3 months after the scandal, taking their 2 children and most of his savings. Now, even his name was a punchline whispered in political circles and courthouse corridors. Sarah Chun closed her laptop slowly. She had just read the reader comments on her latest blog piece, 10 Tips for Winter Gardening. The comments were brutal. Isn't this the same woman who smeared an American hero? Fake journalist turned plant lady. Even now, her past followed her like a shadow that refused to dim. Colonel Washington's closing words reverberated through military bases, classrooms, and every corner of the country where service meant more than image. The difference between a hero and a villain, she said, her voice calm but undeniable, is often not in the actions, but in the perspective of the storyteller. She paused. Hayes tried to make me the villain because he couldn't accept that I was a hero. The room erupted into thunderous applause. 3 universities had already offered her honorary professorships for when she retired. 2 publishers were locked in a bidding war for the rights to her autobiography. That night, in the fluorescent hum of the restaurant kitchen, Hayes yelped as he burned his hand on the deep fryer. He had been distracted, again lost in the white noise of what-ifs. A teenage co-worker glanced over, unimpressed. "Careful, man," she said. "Concentration's everything in this job." Hayes stared at his blistered fingers. Once, they signed 6-figure contracts and shook hands with judges and senators. Now they reeked of grease and detergent. At her military base, Colonel Washington slept peacefully. Her medals rested quietly on the nightstand, reflecting the soft moonlight through the window. Each one carried the weight of missions that had saved lives, altered histories, and protected people who would never know her name. A young officer once asked her, after a lecture, "Do you believe in revenge, ma'am?" She smiled faintly. "Do you know the difference between revenge and justice?" She asked him. "Revenge is personal. Justice is turning your pain into protection for others." Hayes had learned the hard way. When you try to tear down someone who has given everything to protect others, you're not just attacking one person. You're attacking a symbol. And symbols, when struck unjustly, don't fall. They rise. Colonel Washington would reflect on that later, not while thinking of Hayes scrubbing floors or Chun writing about mulch. No, her victory was in every young black service member who now stood taller, trained harder, and no longer felt the need to hide their brilliance behind fear of misunderstanding. 3 years later, her program had reduced reported cases of military discrimination by over 70%. The Pentagon called it a benchmark reform. Her influence would outlive scandal, outlast headlines, and ripple across generations. Hayes still cleared tables, but with less bitterness now. Time had humbled him. Prejudice, he had learned, wounds most deeply the one who carries it. Sarah Chun eventually found a form of redemption, too. She wrote a book, The Cost of the Story, Journalism, Integrity, and My Mistake. It was assigned reading in multiple journalism schools, used as a case study in ethics classes nationwide. And Alexis Washington, Colonel Hero Symbol, became more than a protagonist of a single courtroom drama. She became the catalyst of a movement. If this story moved you, subscribe to the channel. Because true strength doesn't come from tearing others down. It comes from rising so high, with such unstoppable purpose, that the people who doubted you have to crane their necks just to catch a glimpse. And even then, they still won't see the whole of what you are,